Hello, my name is Eric Winkelspecht. I'm a software engineer, and this is part of my Learning Out Loud video series where I'll be talking about current or past projects, problems, how I overcame them, things I've learned, and I hope you join me for the journey. Today I want to talk about a recent project, which is the Connect 4 project, another front-end mentor project I worked through. If you're unfamiliar, frontendmentor.io, it's a great resource where they provide challenges, give design files, and then you just figure out how to make it work with the tools and resources that you want to use. So I can't recommend it enough. Connect 4, we're all familiar with it. It's the basic Connect 4 we all already know and love. The thing I really want to talk about today is the way that I decided to traverse the game board to find a winner, right? So we know, there was some flashing at the top to indicate we're going to click on the top row. Just as you would in a normal game board, you're going to drop pieces into the top, right? You're not going to click somewhere within the game board and select a spot. So we drop our pieces down, our players alternate. I have my timer paused at the moment, but that would typically count down, and when it runs to 0, the player who is waiting for their turn would win. We drop our pieces down, and once we hit 4 in a row, we have a winner. And we also have a nice little highlighting of where the win actually took place. So this was a really fun one for me to solve. I had never built a Connect 4 application before. I had built a tic-tac-toe game right after I finished some of my courses. I've been self-taught this entire time, and at the time just used a bunch of like conditional if statements to check the different patterns on the board and how things could work out, and it worked, but it really wasn't efficient. And I knew with way more spaces in this board, it wasn't something I really wanted to do that way. So I took some time and just thought about what my options are, how we can communicate with the language and say, how do we look? And say, okay, if I have a piece here, do I look next to it? And if there's a matching piece or value, how do I continue to check and know that we have 4 in a row? So the first thing we'll look at is this gamespots.js file, which in this has just a bunch of objects with some key value pairs, right? And you see position, value, right, down, right, down. So let me go ahead and refresh this and click back into our board. And let me uncomment this line so we can see we have a bunch of numbers here. And these numbers correspond to the position in these objects. 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way down. And if we actually look at what this is, if I go to my game board, I can comment out the overlay of the board itself, right? They're just images there. And all of these spaces, if we look at our dev tools, they are just divs in a grid. We just go all the way through that file and we just display each individual object on here. And right now we're displaying the position, which we normally wouldn't, but you can look down here too, and you can see if I click into our game board, we've got, send this out, here's all of our individual divs. So that's basic, right? We'll comment these back in. And what I really want to look at is how we identify the winner, right? So I've got a check winner file over here where I have all my logic to actually run through and see if we have matching values. Every time we drop a piece, the logic is on the piece itself to say, hey, is there space in this column? If I click on column 0, where is the first empty spot from bottom to top? It identifies that, it sends that information over to this function, and we run through each direction, and we're going to find a winner. So I'll give a quick overview of what this does, and then we'll step through it with debugging tools. So we click on a space and call this function, which we're actually checking a bunch of different directions. So we check winner, we check down, we check horizontal, we check forward slash, which is one diagonal direction. We check backslash, which is another diagonal direction. We send in the value of the board, all those positions and what their current values are, the current position that we are filling, as well as the direction. So those map to these spots like right, down, down. Right? So I think the easiest way for me to do this is I've already got a breakpoint set up here. We'll just step into our debugger here, and let's go through this line by line and see how this actually works. So I'm going to leave these numbers up here. It's going to mess up our graphics a little bit. As you can see, we drop a piece down, and I'm going to step through this because the first one isn't going to help us out as much. We've got a little bit of a funky look here, but that's okay. Let's drop another piece, move through this, and we'll drop one more here, and this is where we'll start taking a look at what's going on with this function. So let's expand this out just a little bit more. So we step into this check next function, right? So what's happening here is when we make our selection, we're calling check winner. We have our board in position. We're calling down first, check down. We pass in the board and position, right? And our check down, if I can find where you are, check down, we call this check next, which is the heart of all these functions. Check next is board, position, and our direction, which is down. So I was inspired by learning some computer science and data structure information. I was looking at linked lists and doubly linked lists, and if you're familiar or not familiar, those are node objects that have a value and next, or next and previous if we're talking about doubly linked lists. And what they do is they, unlike an array where it's just one collection, they're separate objects, and they just kind of point to what that next object is in the list. So I took inspiration from that. I built a function that does the same thing. It traverses through these objects, looks what's next to the piece we're currently selected. Do we have matching values? Yes, no. If so, cool. Let's look at the next pair of objects. So here we see we start this function, and we're going to make a counter variable, which will start at 1, because we know we already have one piece out of the 4 we need to win. Excellent. We have our direction, which is down. In this case, we're starting with anything downward. And our position that we passed in was 28. So we're going to take that position, and we're going to give it the name current. So current is updated to 28. We're going to make a next variable, which is literally going to be the next object in the direction that we're looking. So for here, we know we're looking at 28, and next down is 35. So we're going to see that board current direction is going to be updated. Next is 35. Excellent. This whole function, all it does is it looks at 2 pieces at a time, and it compares the values and loops through. Now we have check. Check is just a variable to say, what is the value on the piece we're looking at right now? Is it player 1? Is it player 2? In our case, it's player 1. So we're going to see check updates over here with player 1. And we have a 4 in a row array. And this array we're going to return at the end of this function. So if we do have 4 or more in a row, it's going to send all of those position numbers back, and we can take that, loop through them, and that's how we highlight our individual pieces. So we see on our right-hand side, our 4 in a row is now updated with a single entry of 28. Now we start a loop. We only really need to do this 4 times, right, or 3 times, because we already have 1. So we go through, I is updated to 1, and we start. Now I have a note up here where we say, if current value is not null, and there is still a next position to check against. So basically, we want to make sure that whatever our current space is has a value in there. If it's player 1 or player 2. If it doesn't, we don't need to look at it at all. If it does have a value, is there a next? Is there something next to it that we're going to look at? In the case of if we were looking at 38, if that was our current, we don't have a next. There's no down after that. There's a right and a left if we're looking there, but there's no down, so we don't need to run through this and check anything. So in this case, our board current value, current is 28. We have a value. Our next is down 35. That exists. So we're going to run through this. So now this says if board next value is equal to what our check, so in this case player 1, is the next that we're looking at equal to player 1? If it is, cool. We're going to count that as part of the win, right? So we see here, yeah, it is. Counter plus plus, so now our counter gets updated to 2. Now we know we have 2 in a row. We push that next position onto our array, so we can include that. We see our array is updated to now contain 28 and 35. We know we're going to have those 2 in a row. And now in part of this loop, we're going to update current and next. So basically, we look at 2 pieces. We do our checks, our conditional checks, to see if it's what we want. If it is, we make our updates. We move to the next set of 2. If it looks like what we want, make our updates, move to the next set of 2. So here we have current, which we update to next. Current updates to 35. And then we move down to next, which we're going to update to board current, whatever direction, right? In this case, down. There is no down after that point. So we see that next becomes undefined. And that's okay, right? Because now at this point, we know we have 2 in a row. The function can continue to run, continue to go through its loop. I is updated to 2. We're going to go down to our conditional. If board current value, which we have a value, but there's no next, we don't need to run through this stuff. So we continue through our loop, updating the values appropriately, and then we drop to our return statement. And in here we return counter, which at this point is 2, less than 4, so we know we're not going to have a win. And we return our 4 in a row array. If it was 4, we'd take that array, we would loop through it, and then we'd know what positions on the board to highlight with that white circle. This runs through and it checked down. Now it's going to check, left and right, or the diagonal patterns. But it's just this one function that we send some information to, and we just check those 2 at a time every time and loop through and do the same exact things, adding those things together and finding where we win. Again, this came because I just took time to think on this one. I had never built this before, right? As a software engineer, it is your job to solve challenging problems, to find solutions to challenging problems. And you're going to encounter problems that you haven't solved before. That's why you do what you do. That's the fun of this, right? So I had never built this before, and I was learning new material, and I was able to apply that material to my solution. And I'm extremely happy with how it worked out. I'm very proud of this one. This was a lot of fun to put together, and it was a big learning experience for me. So hopefully this was educational and you took something away from it. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to comment and tell me if you learned anything from this video, or what you're working on now, what problems you're solving, what you've learned in your journey, where you are in your coding journey. Again, this is Eric Winklespect signing off. Hopefully you stick around for the rest of these Learning Out Loud videos. It's been a pleasure. Bye.